The Three Musketeers of delusionally calling for title fights is finally here. I've been waiting for this moment. Ian Garry said he was fuming red after they chose JDM to fight for the belt instead of him. He said he was fuming.
I was steaming red.
All right. Yair Rodriguez, Little Lord Fauntleroy, is back. And he's basically saying, man,
a fight against Volkanovski makes sense for me.
I don't really care about Evloev. I Guadalajara, me and Volk. So he's calling for that as well. And Gene Silva too, even though he just got his first ranked win. And so in this video, I'm going to show you all of their arguments for why they deserve to fight for the belt. And I find them pretty funny, to say the least. And also, I do kind of understand why fighters campaign for title fights when they're not the most deserving, because at the end of the day, they know that it is possible that the UFC chooses them if they make their voice heard. And if they do fight for the belt, they have a chance to become champion where they're going to be getting paid a lot more. So I understand why fighters often campaign for title fights despite the fact that they don't deserve it, but we're just going to talk about the merit. Okay, we're just going to talk about how terrible the reasoning is. And we're going to do Ian Garry first. All right, Ian Garry, Mr. Leak Stew, is back. He's fighting Carlos Prates in a couple of weeks. And I also heard some hilarious takes that he has in the Carlos Prates fight. And Ian Garry has a little bit of a beef with Sean Brady as well. And he said something pretty hysterical when he was talking about Sean Brady. He talked about how he would easily brutalize and finish him. Ian Pillow Hands Garry, that is. I don't know if that's going to happen. But listen, before I show you that, let's get to him talking about how he's not getting the freaking title fight.
Shavkat withdrew.
I think your word withdrew is the word that kind of bugs me on that, because I don't believe Shavkat withdrew due to just pure choice of not wanting to fight for a title, but from what I'm hearing is more an injury. An injury that I absolutely believe he sustained in the fight with me due to the amount of heel kicks I put to his knee.
That's right. Shavkat didn't just withdraw from the fight because of a little minor injury. It was actually the fact that Ian Machado Garry, and you know what? Let me just say this because people are going to think I don't like Ian Garry. Dude, Ian Garry is a savage. He's taking all of these fights. You know, he's like the most active guy in the welterweight division. I respect the fact that he's like always game, always stepping up, willing to save the day. It's very rare that we see that with top contenders. We usually see it with like the old fuck it type of fighters like Donald Cowboy Cerrone and Bobby Green, people that don't really care if they win or lose. Ian Garry's doing it as like a top 5 contender, which is pretty good. But he's saying that Shavkat didn't just withdraw. He was severing his knee. That he brutally injured Shavkat in that fight where Ian Garry was throwing lima bean jabs and little flicky side kicks to Shavkat's knee with absolutely zero sting on them. And he's basically twisting this in, Shavkat, even though he beat me, can't fight for the belt because I beat his ass so badly. It's basically what Corey Sandhagen was saying about TJ Dillashaw, that TJ may have got the victory, but his village was still burning, right? Corey Sandhagen raided his village and pillaged it, and it was still burning when TJ Dillashaw fought Aljamain Sterling. But this is just ridiculous, dude. Like, Ian Garry literally did no damage in that fight. It was a smudge fest, clinch fest. The only big punches were landed by Shavkat. Ian Garry did land some lima bean jabs, absolutely. And he did take Shavkat's back, which was very impressive. 100%. It was very impressive he took Shavkat's back. That was great. But not a lot happened in that fight. And I don't think Shavkat is just severed and brutalized because of what went down at UFC 296. Not for one bit do I think that that's why Shavkat is messed up. Or not 296. That was the Leon Edwards Colby card. But let's hear what he has to say.
And then, we're in a world title fight for the #1 contender spot. So the guy who wins the fight, and rightfully so, I believe he still won the fight to this day. But if he's not available, it makes logical sense to go to me, not a guy who's been out for a year.
You don't have any momentum when you're coming off of a loss in a stink fest where damn near nothing fucking happened. All right? And he's saying that, I was fuming red. I'll let him say it. I'll let him say it.
I was steaming red.
Steaming red.
I was just seething because I'm like, all right, this is how it is. Okay.
And you look at his expression, he's smirking at us like he thinks that we think the same thing as him, and that's that it's so unbelievably laughable. It's laughable that I didn't get the shot. And you guys know it. And you're looking at me, and I'm looking at you, and we're all laughing that JDM is getting the title fight. We all think it's ridiculous. That's the way that he's looking at the camera. And it's like, dude, you lost a number one contenders fight, and the fight sucked. It's not like it was a war. And, I mean, yes, you had the moment where he took Shavkat's back, but the fight was terrible. Both fighters came out of that with less hype than they had before. Even the winner. Okay? The logical pick is to go with a guy who has a record that looks like this. Jack Della Maddalena. That's a 7-fight UFC win streak. KO after KO after KO after KO. Finish after finish. Coming off of a comeback victory against Gilbert Burns. He's unbeatable in the UFC. We don't know what it's going to take, even though we saw that fight with Basil Hoffus, but JDM has finishing potential. It's a fresh matchup. You could say Ian Garry's a fresh matchup with Bilal, but you know what? It doesn't really feel like a fresh matchup because he's coming off of a freaking lima bean showcase where he's flicking little fucking peasant punches, flicking little fruity pebble punches. All right? I want to see Bilal fight somebody that's throwing hammers, that's trying to take your head off. Not this guy in Ian Garry that just had a stinkfest against Shavkat. Didn't give us a show at all. Again, I like Ian Garry, and I think that he is a great guy to have in this division, and I think he's entertaining most of the time, okay? And I really respect the fact that he steps up to fight and he steps up to the plate to save the day. As I said, that's amazing. Nobody else in the division is doing that. You got to give Ian Garry credit for that. You got to respect it. But I also find it funny that he's saying that like there's no hype behind JDM, but there is some hype behind him.
The words I heard were, we can't give him a title shot off a loss. And I'm like, yeah, but you can.
Well, that's not really selling it. Yeah, but you can. But you could if you're feeling friendly. But you know what? I don't want a title shite. A fucking title. A shite on the bus. I don't want a title fight riding off of a guy that's saying, you know, but you could. I don't want the UFC to give people title fights based on,
yeah, but you can.
Yeah, they could give it to me. They could give me the title fight as well. And I could say it as confidently as that, which is not very confident. Okay? They can give Jim Miller a title fight. You could give Jim Miller a title fight. He's the most winningest fighter in the UFC history. Okay? Like, this is just crazy. Ian Garry knows. He knows he's got no argument for a title fight. And that's why he sounds like that.
And you have them many times in the past.
That is true. We're going to get to that. Okay? He has a point there. But before we get to Yair, I'm also going to play a little bit of what Ian Garry had to say about Sean Brady and Carlos Prates, namely that he's going to easily finish them when he fights them.
How does April 26th end?
Every time I like sit down in the sauna and I visualize it, I just constantly seeing his head being bounced off the canvas.
Ian Garry just can't help but see him bouncing Carlos Prates' head off the canvas because that's how he usually wins his fights, right? Against Jeff Neal, he bounced his head off the cage when they were smudging in the clinch. And he was bouncing Shavkat Rakhmonov's head off the canvas when they were grappling and smudging up against the fence. Or that time when Ian Garry bounced. Who the fuck is this guy bounced off the canvas, dude? Let's be honest. Like, listen, I am aware that he has a bunch of finishes in the UFC and he's knocked out a bunch of guys as well. But like, Ian Garry against high levels of competition has not bounced a single fucking head off the canvas. All right? And the way that he's talking about Carlos Prates, who is the KO guy, who does bounce people's heads and faces off the canvas, I just find it funny. Listen, I've said this before, but Ian Garry, in my opinion, has slowed down a little bit on the feet. Literally, he looks slower, less powerful. And I think that's because of his diet. And I still think he's a good striker, but I don't see the same quick twitch Ian Garry, high output Ian Garry, willing to take risks. And so it's not only that he's not finishing people now, but he's not even looking like he's capable of finishing people at this point. Even though he is, of course, he could land a head kick. I mean, we saw him do that against Daniel Rodriguez, but his finishing potential has severely declined since he started fighting top levels of competition. He's still great, still a good striker, but it can't help myself but laugh when he's saying this. And this is what he was saying about Sean Brady.
This one has to happen at some point.
I punched him out off him. He'd try shoot an ugly takedown. I'd put a knee through his nose and he'd never be able to breathe again. I'd squish it.
Dude, you're going to put a knee through his nose and he's never going to be able to breathe again. Or you would squish it.
I'd squish it.
Which one is it? Because there's a big difference. And Ian Garry caught himself after that, realizing that he ain't freaking severing anybody's face. All right? And that at most, he would squish it.
He'd try shoot an ugly takedown. I'd put a knee through his nose and he'd never be able to breathe again.
He'd never be able to breathe again. Sean Brady, Ian Garry is so dangerous. Sean Brady shoots a takedown. He's never breathing again. He's looking like a chimpanzee attack victim. And this is how Ian Garry sees it going down. This is the next thing that he says. This is what's going to happen. Are you going to put a knee through his nose and sever his face forever and make him look like a chimpanzee attack victim? Or are you going to squish his little nose with your fucking vegan knee? I think that's a little bit more likely. I know Ian Garry would fucking flying knee KO me, by the way. For anyone in the comments that's going to be like, bro, shut the fuck up, dude. You could never be in the cage with Ian Garry. I'd probably get flying knee KO'd. But the point that I'm making is Ian Garry is sort of like the new Adesanya, always talks about bouncing people's heads off the canvas and crushing people's teeth in and putting knees through people's faces and taking crowbars to their domes. Even though, listen, I'm not doing a good Ian Garry accent, but then he thinks about how he would do all of this and the reality is, okay? And Ian Garry severing Shavkat Rakhmonov's kneecaps and combusting them was actually tapping strikes to the leg from Ian Garry. So the talk is way different than the reality. Again, if I were to fight Ian Garry, he would fucking flying knee my head into orbit, into outer space. I'm not delusional. But against the highest level fighters in the world, he's been a lot more reserved than he was back in the day. Back in the day, Ian Garry was decapitating some people. Against high levels of competition, to be honest, I don't think I've seen Ian Garry land one big shot in his last two fights. So I just, I wanted to talk about that. But now let's get on to Yair Rodriguez. He's going to talk about why he thinks he deserves to fight with Alexander Volkanovski. And listen, I normally wouldn't make anything out of this, but you know that it could happen because the UFC just loves giving Mexican fighters title fights on Guadalajara, Mexico cards, okay? Even though they haven't had a lot of them. But you sort of understand what I'm saying? The UFC just has to have everybody in every single fight on a Mexico card be from Mexico. We don't have to have two no-names fighting on the fucking main card just because they're from Mexico. I'm sure they would rather see JDM have a grit-down battle with Jeff Neal, despite the fact that they're not from Mexico, than two unknown fighters, one of them from fucking Dana White Contender Series, and the other guy who was about to get cut from the UFC in that same slot on a main card. And this is the thing. You could just see them giving him a title fight. I know it. I know Hunter Campbell probably went up to this guy backstage and said, buddy, you're going to get the shot. Dude, we're going to hook you up, Guadalajara, Mexico. You're going to get the shot. And this is why Yair is so confident. And for people that don't know, Yair is the king of demanding title fights after losses. This is what Yair had to say.
Just curious, obviously you know about Movsar and the streak that he's on. What do you say to someone who says he's won 9 in a row, he should get a crack at the belt first?
Man, I don't know. The only thing that I can tell you is that a fight against Volkanovski makes sense for me. I don't want to talk about like Movsar or whatever. He's an incredible fighter.
Listen, I'm coming off of 3 losses in a row, but a fight against Makhachev, where he's coming off of the scales. If it's weight cut, it makes a lot of sense for me. Guadalajara, Mexico. Thank you. I'll take Volkanovski at 40 years old.
Now, what I hear from the UFC, you only have to come from a win.
Back in the day, they used to give people title shots coming off of 20 wins. Now, you just have to get one. Just one win. This is the thing. And Ian Garry was saying the same thing, right? So it's like they're bringing up decent points with this shit, and it's annoying because the UFC can justify it by saying, well, we've done it before.
And Volkanovski and I had a background fighting, for the belt.
With that logic, we may as well give Jamie Malarkey a title fight because Jamie Malarkey fought Volkanovski back in the day before both of them were in the UFC. And actually, they spar together quite often, so they have more of a history than Yair. So you know what? Fuck that. Let's do Jamie Malarkey versus Volk because that makes a lot of sense for Jamie Malarkey. Give him a crack at the belt. I'm sure that'd be really good for him. Or Ortega. Ortega beat you. This is a serious one. With this logic, Ortega should have got the title fight against Ilia Topuria when he fought Yair Rodriguez last year and beat him. The fight before that, Ortega lost. He beat Yair. He should have fought for the title, but no, he had to fight Diego Lopez. So this idea of, well, I need to get my rematch just because I fought him before. First off, that is the least hyped fight you could possibly make in the UFC right now. That is the biggest abomination you could possibly make in the UFC right now. If they give Yair the title fight, straight up, you're just letting Yair have a fluke chance at front kick KOing old man Volkanovski. It's fucking pathetic. It better be Evloev because he actually deserves it. And if we look at Yair's resume or his record, let's see how he's been doing. So he beats a Bellator fighter at 37 years old in Patricio Pitbull, who's making his UFC debut. And before that, he lost to Brian Ortega. And before that, he lost to Alexander Volkanovski. So he did fight for the belt about a year and a half ago, and he lost. And then he had a chance to rebound after that, and he lost again. So when you lose again after losing for the title, that's 3 steps back, all right? You're not closer. You're further than you were right before you fought Brian Ortega. Now you fight a Bellator guy. Okay, now you're 1 step closer, but you're still 2 steps back. Get a couple more wins. Nobody wants to see Yair fight for the fucking belt. And the stupidest argument is this fucking, it's Guadalajara, Mexico. It has to be against a Mexican fighter. I know Dana White would say some shit like that at a press conference. And if you're the kind of person to think that, oh man, don't worry, they're not going to give Yair a title fight. Don't worry, it's going to be Evloev. Let me show you the rankings at featherweight because this actually should worry you. All right? Look, we have Yair Rodriguez at the number 4 spot. Movsar Evloev below Yair, also at the number 4 spot. There's no number 5 spot, but essentially, Movsar is below Yair. Visually, that means something. They could have put Movsar ahead of Yair, but no, they put Yair ahead of Movsar, despite the fact that Movsar is on a 9-fight win streak, okay? And he's coming off of a win against Aljo and Arnold Allen. Both higher ranked than the people that Yair just beat. Patricio Pitbull, not even ranked, making his UFC debut. Josh Emmett at the number 10 spot, who he beat before he got 2 losses in a row to Volkanovski and to Brian Ortega. And still, Josh Emmett is below Arnold Allen, and he's below Aljamain Sterling. And Brian Ortega is below Arnold Allen as well. And Brian Ortega just beat Yair Rodriguez, and he's still below the guy that Movsar beat 2 fights ago. Now, I don't think Movsar actually should have won his fight against Arnold Allen, but on paper he did. How is it the case that off of a win against somebody that isn't even ranked, when before that you lost 2 fights in a row, you're going to get bumped above the guy that just beat the number 9 and number 6 ranked contenders that's been on an absolute tear, that before that beat Dan Ige? That's 3 people in the rankings that Movsar Evloev has consecutive wins over. Actually, 4. Wait a second. 4. He beat Dan Ige. He beat Diego Lopez, who's ranked number 2. He beat Arnold Allen, ranked number 6. He beat Aljamain Sterling, ranked number 9. And he has no losses in the UFC. And they're putting Yair ahead of him, who's coming off of a 1-fight win streak against a guy that's not even ranked, and before that had 2 losses in a row, and before that his win was against Josh Emmett, who's at the number 10 spot now. Give me a fucking break. They're setting this up. I just know it. They're setting this up, and you could just see Dana White, shutting down a reporter for suggesting that the fight should have been Alexander Volkanovski versus Evloev, and Dana White will be there in Guadalajara, Mexico, saying, you think we should have done Volkanovski versus somebody that isn't Mexican in Guadalajara, Mexico, instead of Yair Rodriguez, who just beat an absolute monster in Pitbull? Does anyone else hear this? Or I can't be the only one hearing this. You think that we should have given the title fight to Movsar in Mexico? We have to give it to a Mexican fighter, right? You would think. That's the fight that the people want to see. They're already setting this shit up. We can't allow this to slide. It should not be a given that Volk is fighting in Guadalajara to begin with. I don't want this guy to get food poisoning, dude. All right? I know Joe Pyfer just got food poisoning in Mexico, but listen, I'm sure it's not so common with fighters, but hey, man, we don't want to take any risks with Volk's legacy. All right? And also, again, it's almost as if like, oh yeah, it's just a given Volk in Guadalajara. Well, conveniently, that is about 6 pay-per-views away. That seems to be around when Volkanovski would be making his return, but again, this can't be it. Volkanovski, the fight to make for him is the guy that is unbeaten in the UFC. It's the fight where it's actually going to be competitive on paper because that's a guy that's going to be able to go hard 5 rounds with Volkanovski. He has good cardio. He has great pace, great grappling, good at mixing it up instead of a useless rematch that we don't want to see. And not only do we not want to see the rematch, but Yair doesn't have a lot of hype behind him right now. Movsar, he may not have the most hype. He may not be that popular, but again, that is the fight to make. That is Volkanovski's next big test. It's not a guy that he literally beat 2 fights ago. All right? And people just don't want to see Yair get it as well because he's always calling for these undeserved title fights, man. You know what? They want to see Yair fight, but let's do him versus Diego Lopez. That fight has hype. And if he wins that, okay, man, maybe you can give him a freaking title fight. All right? Or do Yair versus, I was about to say Aaron Pico. Actually, fuck that. No, we're not doing an Aaron Pico number 1 contenders fight. But Yair versus Diego Lopez is the fight to make. The reason why these guys are calling for these fights, okay, is because the new standard is, as long as you have a little bit of hype, if you just get 1 win after a loss, like we saw with Dustin Poirier, who got head kick KO'd by Justin Gaethje and then bounced back to get a win over Benoit Saint-Denis, if you get 1 win after a loss, you're fighting for the belt next. All right? Dustin Poirier got his undeserved title fight against Islam Makhachev. It was a great fight. In hindsight, I'm kind of happy that it happened. And the other thing is, if you win your UFC debut as a former Bellator fighter, here's your title shot, right? This is what they were trying to do with Aaron Pico and Movsar Evloev. Movsar Evloev, 9-10 fight win streak. I don't know if it's 9 fights or 10 fights, but he's on a crazy win streak. He's going to be the guy that all the fans want to see fighting for a belt next. He's the one that the people want to see. He's the one that has earned it and deserves it based on merit. But no, we're actually trying to give him Aaron Pico, this guy that wasn't even a champion in Bellator. Barely anyone that's not a hardcore fan of the sport knows who he is. And that has to be the number 1 contenders fight. We can't have a number 1 contenders fight without a Bellator fighter. We need Bellator fighters to decide who can fight for the belt. And we also can't let the guys that have earned their stripes in the UFC fight for a belt. No, not so fast. You got to go through this guy from Bellator. We got to give him a chance to fluke it. So we're just going to let Aaron Pico, or we're just going to let Patricio Pitbull jump the line and not actually have to earn it. And you may say, well, they've earned it in Bellator, and they're freaking legends in Bellator, man. That's what counts. It's a different promotion altogether. Ian Garry was a champion in Cage Warriors. What are we going to say? Oh, well, Cage Warriors is totally different. Well, it is different. It's not as high level as Bellator, but nonetheless, at least have some middle ground. When Ian Garry enters the UFC, he's getting the usual rookie treatment where he's fighting very low-ranked fighters. I know Bellator is higher level, so if you're going to take the champions and bring them over to the UFC, at least have them fight someone that's like right outside of the top 15 or at the top of the top 15. Not the top as in like the number 1 spot, but like the number 15 spot. It's ridiculous how they just give these guys such easy opportunities to fight for a UFC title just because wouldn't it be crazy if this random Bellator fighter fought for the title? That would be a wild ride. That'd be a wild roller coaster of emotion, man. Fuck that shit. I'm fucking sick and tired of this fucking bullshit ass. Here's Aaron Pico. Aaron Pico had a lot to say about Alexander Volkanovski looking old and washed up. Who have you beat? What? Name me one person that this guy has beat. What, Henry Corrales? 55-year-old Henry Corrales? The guy that slept him back in the day? That's like one of his most recent wins, and he's sitting here talking about Alexander Volkanovski looking old and Diego Lopez looking sloppy? You've not fought anyone near the level of Diego Lopez. Not even fucking close. And you're just, yeah, man, I'm just going to slide in here. Just because, I'm the real deal. I train at, John Jones' gym. I'm the real deal. I'm just going to slide into a number one contenders fight. It's just ridiculous, man. Movsar Evloev is set to beat former champion Aljamain Sterling, top contender in his prime Arnold Allen. He had to beat Diego Lopez, and that win aged really, really well. I mean, this guy clearly is the number one contender that people recognize as the next in line for the belt. And the UFC is out here trying to make him go through another pointless test while, there's a chance they're going to let Yair slip through the cracks because he beats another Bellator fighter. Why are all of these number one contenders fights with Bellator fighters? Enough. It needs to stop. If you're from Bellator and you come over to the UFC, unless you're a once-in-a-generation Bellator talent and you're a multiple-time defending champion in your prime and you're a good trash talker and you're selling a fight between you and the UFC champ, we cannot be letting these guys get close to a belt. They have to come in and at least get a couple of wins. Aaron Pico should not be fighting Movsar Evloev. All right, Patricio Pitbull shouldn't be fighting Yair Rodriguez. Patricio Pitbull should have freaking joined the UFC. Actually, Yair Rodriguez isn't so bad of a fight. It's just that now that Yair's talking about a title fight, you just know the UFC could let him fight for the fucking belt in Guadalajara because he's Mexican. It seems like that was a number one contenders fight, even though it shouldn't, but it does because the UFC has allowed them to be number one contenders fights in the past. But with someone like Aaron Pico, this guy should be fighting Sean Woodson in his UFC debut. He should be fighting Dan Ige. All right? And if he beats Dan Ige, then he should be fighting someone like Lerone Murphy or Gene Silva. And if he beats them, then he should be maybe getting considered for a number one contenders fight. Okay? But none of this bullshit. And this is the thing. If Aaron Pico wins in his UFC debut, there's going to be an argument to give him a title fight. I just know it right now. Whoever they give this guy, he's going to have his Bellator plot armor. All right? Whoever they give this guy. If it's Arnold Allen, if he somehow miraculously knocks out Arnold Allen, they're going to talk about giving him a title fight. You just know that's going to happen. So, yeah, it's ridiculous, man. But at the end of the day, you can't really blame them too much because Ian Garry is seeing Dustin Poirier get a title fight, and the same thing can be said for Gene Silva and Yair Rodriguez. Everybody's getting an easy title fight. And hey, Yair just beat a Bellator fighter. And what has that meant in the past? Well, Bellator fighters, when they come over to the UFC, they get title fights right after. So if Yair beats a guy that was supposed to get a title fight right after, well, he should fight for the belt too. And Gene Silva's calling for a title fight as well, even though he just fought his first-ranked contender in Bryce Mitchell. And you know what? I actually would rather see Gene Silva fight for the belt than Yair, because Yair's already had his chance. And this is another thing. For people that have already had their chance, you shouldn't be anywhere near a title fight unless you get 3 wins, right? Max Holloway. How many fights did Max Holloway have to win in order to get the trilogy with Volkanovski? Let's see. He had to beat Calvin Kattar. And then after that, he had to beat Yair Rodriguez. So he had to win 2 high-level fights. As a former dominant champion, he had 4 title defenses, or maybe it was 3. I think it was 3 or 4. A 3-time defending champion in Max Holloway had to bounce back with 2 wins after his rematch with Alexander Volkanovski, right? I understand they gave him the rematch immediately, but still, Yair Rodriguez is not Max Holloway. He should not be getting considered for a title fight. And Ian Garry, I'd like to see him fight for the belt in the future. All right, I think if he beats Carlos Prates, then I don't mind him fighting for the title. But there's no hype behind that. The people don't want to see it. There's no hype in a fight with Belal Muhammad unless the person that Belal's fighting is also similar to him in stature and style and pace and has a threat of putting him out. And Ian Garry just doesn't have a crazy KO threat. to be honest. I know he's good. Maybe he could beat Belal. I know he's very good. But I want to see Belal fight someone that's throwing hammers, because then it's actually believable that, oh, wait, Belal might be able to get this one done. Because, if Shavkat Rakhmonov is smudging you up against the fence, then Belal Muhammad might be able to do that too. So, and Gene Silva, when I say that I would rather see him fight for the title, that's just because of how easily he's been making everyone look. Yair just had a stink fest with Pitbull, whereas Gene Silva had a dominant masterclass against a really solid grappler in Bryce Mitchell. And he still doesn't deserve the title fight. So Gene Silva should be fighting Lerone Murphy. And if he styles on Lerone Murphy and flying knee KOs him after dominating him for 2 rounds, then okay. That's the situation where if something happens with a number 1 contender, they get injured in a training camp for Volkanovski, then Gene Silva fills in. By the way, I never want Gene Silva to fight Volk, because I think he'd beat him. At least the version of Volk that we have today, I think he'd beat him. There's going to be some people rolling their eyes. Whoa, Volk's not older. He's not washed up. I'm telling you, man, people are not looking at Volk as objectively as possible. He is looking a tiny bit older, guys. He still had a great performance, and there is some truth to me being very nervous while watching the fight, and I was kind of projecting how nervous I was onto his performance. So I am going to watch the fight back. I haven't watched the fight back, so I'll maybe when I watch it back, it'll look like, he was more in his prime than I was saying. But listen, Gene Silva is a nightmare matchup for everyone. But even he shouldn't be fighting for the belt. Okay? And it needs to be Evloev. Okay? We cannot allow the UFC to allow this Yair Rodriguez Volkanovski rematch to pick up traction. And how annoying would it be if Yair Rodriguez and Alexander Volkanovski rematched and Yair Rodriguez flatlined him with a nicely timed front kick up the middle? This guy couldn't beat Alexander Volkanovski when Volk was in his prime. And now we're just going to give Yair a fuck it title shot just because he happens to be from Mexico, even though he doesn't deserve it. Nobody wants to see it. The fans aren't hyped for it. Imagine if when it's all said and done, these guys are 1-1 and Yair is the champ, KOing the legend, fan favorite Alexander Volkanovski because he got an undeserved title fight and he ends up fluking it and he knocks out an older, withered Volk. Again, Volk's not totally out of his prime. He still has it, absolutely. But if he loses to someone like Yair, it's going to be because he ain't the same guy. And I don't want to see Yair have the ability to rematch Volk when he had that fucking shot like 2 fights ago. All right? We cannot have that happen. It's Volkanovski and Evloev. The fact that we have to even discuss this, and the only reason why I'm discussing this is because I just think it is possible that the UFC makes something like this happen where they actually give the shot to Yair. So it is possible. I can see it. I've seen it before. Man. And you could see Dana White justifying it and laughing at the idea of Volkanovski and Evloev in Mexico. The UFC needs to cut it out with these undeserved title fights. And until next time.